The following is a conversation with KS Narendran. He's an author, a seeker of truth, and a man whose life was irrevocably altered on March 8, 2014, when his wife Chandrika boarded Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. We often talk about the vanished as a technical phenomenon, the loss of a signal, the disappearance of a 200-ton aircraft into the deep, dark silence of the southern Indian Ocean. But Narendran reminds us that what truly vanishes is not just the shared rhythms of life together, the morning tea, the quiet glances, the future that was supposed to happen. For almost 12 years, he has lived in the liminal space, that haunting territory between hope and closure, where the world demands you move on, but the lack of answers tethers you to the past. He has navigated the bureaucracy of tragedy and the indifference of institutions, all while maintaining a profound, quiet dignity. I have often wondered about the nature of loss. Is grief a mountain we eventually climb, or is it a landscape we simply learn to inhabit? Narendran has spent over a decade mapping that landscape, finding words for the unspeakable and searching for humanity buried beneath the debris of a global mystery. In doing so, he has become a voice for those left in the wake of the unknown. This is the Sit Down, the Sit podcast. And now, here is my conversation with KS Narendran. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our audience from around the globe. This is your host, Sid, and welcome back to the Sit Down with Sid podcast, where we bring people together from around the world, one conversation at a time. A quick note before we begin. MH370 remains a complex mystery with many conflicting theories. The views expressed by our guests are their own. Our goal is to provide a platform for various perspectives as we continue to piece together this story. Joining us today is KS Narendran. For almost 12 years, Naren has been a profound voice for the MH370 community. A management consultant by profession, he became an unlikely activist after his wife Chandrika was on that ill-fated flight back on March 8, 2014. Over the years, Naren has articulated the quiet, heavy reality of living in the open space of a missing loved one. We are speaking at a momentous time, just weeks after the 12th anniversary of the disappearance, and as the world once again looks towards the Indian Ocean for answers. It is a profound honor to have you here to help us navigate the human side of this mystery. Naren, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sid. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the efforts you're putting in to lend a voice, to be the platform for a voice of all varied kinds of voices connected to MH370, the scientific community, people who've been active in searching the coastlines, families, and hopefully sometime perhaps you would include a few from the government of Malaysia as well, and other governments as well, if they're willing to come on your podcast. That'll be nice to hear.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to, we have few guests lined up already after you, and we are trying to also reach out to some authorities. I don't know, we are trying our best, due to the nature of the topic. They might not be comfortable speaking in public as of now till the search is going on. So let's see. But we have gotten tremendous support, tremendous love uh, from the MS370 community. And once again, we are grateful and thank you to you for accepting our invite. Okay. Um,
Thank you.
with that being said, let's get into it. So, You have lived with this mystery for over 12 years. How has your definition of waiting changed from those first frantic weeks in 2014 to the life you lead today?
It's an interesting question. Let me try and wind back to where we started. That is
Sure.
2014. I think waiting has acquired, a very different quality, a very different feeling tonality, as the years have gone by. For instance, in the initial days, the waiting was all about waiting for information. And then it was a waiting for confirmation. And then I think we moved to a phase where we were waiting for some kind of assurance, a reassurance, an assurance from the governments concerned that indeed they are on the job, that they are indeed trying to locate the plane. And particularly from the government of India, I was waiting for some kind of word from them to say that, they will extend whatever support, both in terms of information and in terms of, what might be some of the next steps I may have to look at, because, nothing prepares you for an event like this. And given an incident which is of international proportions, and I expected that, there would be some assistance, some support, some expression of solidarity that would come from the government also. So there was all kinds of waiting. And then we moved on to a phase of waiting, which is really about waiting for the search efforts to bear some fruits. And it's not been an even paced search effort. As we've had, you know, search efforts and then a halt and then some more and then a pause and then some more search and then a suspension of the search. So it's been, an on now, off now kind of an experience over the years. So the idea of waiting, has moved from news about waiting for news about loved ones
Hmm.
to news about the location of the plane, the fate of the plane, and the fate of the passengers. And that wait has, not abated. It has just continued one form or the other. We moved from anticipation, hope, desperation, despondency, annoyance, exasperation, and in some ways a certain helplessness with the way things are. So the waiting itself so the question I really ask myself, wait for what? And the wait for what has a different answer at different times. And
Hmm.
also how that waiting has been experienced has also changed over time. Now I'm waiting for Ocean Infinity to come up and hopefully come up with some answers. And am I expectant? Am I looking forward to it? Yes and no. Does one look forward to knowing that the plane actually went down there?
Hmm.
It's very hard to be exuberant about it, but yet one
Right.
has been waiting for answers. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's fascinating. We started this MH370 series, and where as we have progressed with various experts, family members like yourself and Grace Nathan, the perspective is so powerful that it has moved us as a platform, and that is why our goal is we are a neutral platform. We are not biased. We don't vouch for any theories, anyone, but our platform is here to give voices for people like yourself. That is why our motto is bringing people together around the world, one conversation at a time. The whole thing is to have that humanity, that element in our conversation. So, um, and thank you so much for explaining the way you explained. It's completely understood the transition that you've explained. Moving along now. In psychology, ambiguous loss is grief without a body or a final answer. How do you find the mental strength to build a future when the past remains officially open?
Well, I wasn't familiar with the term till a friend of mine pointed it out a few days after the plane went missing, and I was trying to explain to him that, on the one hand, from all signs and signals, it does seem that perhaps the plane is lost for good,
Hmm.
and I may have lost my wife. And yet, it was not something that was so easy to comprehend, much less accept to start
Mm-hmm.
with,
Mm-hmm.
and as time went by, there was this experience of the person's absence. You know, uh, it's a daily reality that my wife was missing, that she was not around, and in all
Right.
probability, she was never going to come back. While at the same time, she was very alive in thoughts, moment to moment. You know, one relived, plans we made, conversations we had, um, issues that we grappled with collectively. And so it almost seemed as if there was a reality that was coexisting, partly in the head, but also an understanding that, in fact, this person is missing.
Mm-hmm.
And as the days went by, it became very apparent that
Mm-hmm.
we were not going to have a happy end to this thing. And
Mm-hmm.
this is going to be a loss, not temporary, but a loss which is permanent, irreversible. Yeah. And, but in the absence of evidence of the plane, debris or remains of passengers, it was not so easy to just simply come to a conclusion. Members of my own family were quite
Mm-hmm.
unwilling to draw the line and say, I think this is it. I think we have reached the end of our waiting. And
Mm-hmm.
I think we just have to conclude that she is no more. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that we were quite ready for some months as a family. All
Right.
right. So there was that reality as well, that there was an idea, there was a hope, there was a picture that people held of something that is, in the offing, of a good outcome in the offing, in the
Mm-hmm.
absence of any concrete evidence that it was all over. And also the reality that, in one's own daily experience, I'm constantly accompanied by recollections, by memory, by voices of conversations that one had over the years.
Mm-hmm.
So that is so. How does one deal with it? Was a big question. I think part of it was dealt with by writing. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
I think I just tried putting down whatever I felt. Sometimes writing was also a way to discover what was really happening within me,
Mm-hmm.
because I could not find the words conversation, but I found it easier when I sat down to gaze at an empty page and then the words would just flow. All right. The other thing also is that, after some months in a state of limbo,
Mm-hmm.
where no decisions about anything got taken, things were just as they were, and by and large, life ran on auto mode, or as my wife may have liked it to be. So there was no agency that I brought into any part of the management of the house or my work or my colleagues, my friends, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we let things float in limbo till such time I said, life cannot wait. You know, uh, the clock doesn't stop and life cannot wait. And if I have to move forward, I have to accept at least the reality that my wife is not around and she is probably never going to come back. And
Mm-hmm.
that it's now up to me to make my peace, how hard it is and how much time it takes. But at least intellectually, I had to come to the point that, I have to take responsibility for myself, my family, my daughter, my work, and whatever other purposes that I might define for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So, dealing with so this whole question of ambiguous loss was, I think, worked through in a certain way where one came to a point of acceptance
Mm-hmm.
that reality, you can't cloak reality or couch reality, and reality is as is, and what it is, one has to confront it. And I think once that point was reached, I think it became a little clearer, a little easier to then say, okay, what are my choices from here on? And what am I willing to act on? And I think that's broadly been at least my process of dealing with it.
Wow. I can't even imagine. And I know you had brought up like taking care of your daughter. So my follow-up question to that is, in this, it was not you yourself, it was your daughter as well. How did you manage to protect her growth and happiness as a single parent while carrying this unsolved burden?
I'll be honest, it was quite difficult. And I think it prepared me for this eventuality. So had to kind of grow up and find my way around this whole question of how do I be a, an anchor, a support, an emotional go-to person,
Hmm.
and also in some sense steer her through her teens, because these were her critical formative years in her teens, in her early years in college. And so I was trying as best as I could, to be around, to be available, and to let her know that I'm available 24 hours a day and no question is taboo, and no expression of whatever she felt is
Hmm.
something that will be uh, rejected or judged. All right. And I think we found things to do together, a little bit of travel here and there, where we had the opportunity to have longer conversations. She
Hmm.
was studying in Delhi, so I found opportunities to travel to Delhi to see if I could at least spend some hours there. Getting her onto a track where she has a certain routine that provides a certain anchor for her, and to get her to apply her mind both to her studies and to her health and her well-being became absolutely crucial. And I think once I was convinced that she was at least set on a course which, she was at ease with, in terms of her work, her studies, and so on, and that there was a certain regularity and a rhythm of her life that was reestablished. It became then a little more easy, and I could breathe a little easy and not be overly concerned, because I think I knew that if something bothered her, she would pick the phone and speak.
Hmm.
But I'm sure she had her own struggles, and she had her own lows and struggles and questions and doubts, not just about the event and the loss of her mother, but also about the larger question of the accident and what happened and why it happened. But I think by and large, she let me deal with that end of it. And
Hmm.
so the essential point here was that she had her difficulties, she had her struggles. I have tried to be sensitive and to anticipate and to pick up the cues and signals that might suggest that she is not in a good place when she is unable to verbalize.
Hmm.
I may have succeeded to some extent, but it's very hard to know whether she really felt adequately supported, whether she has, whether I've been able to. Uh, I was quite clear, for instance, that I cannot be the mother that she will miss, but I can be the father that she can be proud of. That's all that I can do. And hopefully I've managed to do that to whatever extent to the best of my ability.
Hmm.
And ultimately, we continue to have a very close, dear relationship, a very intimate relationship as a
Hmm.
father and daughter. And so that gives me a lot of solace, a lot of comfort, a lot of satisfaction.
Hmm. Wow. Okay. Cool. I mean, I can feel the depth in your conversation. It comes through your voice when you talk. So once again, I think on behalf of the community also, I would like to extend another thanks to you. So okay,
Thank you.
moving along. You're a part of the MH370 community. As the years passed, how has that collective bond changed? Are you still finding strength in each other, or has the group naturally drifted into their own private silence?
If you ask me, when I look back, I think the MS370 families have been an interesting grouping. We were drawn from some 14 countries
Hmm.
with very different language and time zones. that we were coming from. And so we've struggled through finding a common time and a space where we could connect, communicate, bond, express, and be for each other. So it's been a struggle, but we've managed that reasonably well. The interesting thing is that we never had this expectation that everybody will be active and engaged all the time. So I think people had the space to be active, contribute what they could, called upon to do something else. They stepped back and somebody else stepped up to be available. So I think we've managed this reasonably well over the years. But language has been sometimes a barrier.
Mm-hmm.
If you recall, there were 150 plus Chinese families affected.
Yes.
And so, that's a language that not everybody understands or follows. English has by and large ended up becoming a kind of a link language to a great extent. But the fact of the matter is, at different times, we have had to contend with the reality that each family is grieving and working through its own loss and sorrow in its own way at its own pace, right? And
Mm-hmm.
each family is trying to reconfigure its own family, its own relationship with its environment, and so to foist a certain uniformity of expectations or that everybody will be, gung ho happen. I don't think we held to that kind of an expectation, and I think it therefore provided space to the families to be themselves, to pursue their own healing and their own growing, and allowed for others who were sufficiently evoked to stay on course with
Mm-hmm.
demanding answers, did so. So, therefore, let's look at it. Many of the families have had either a child being born, some family member, being lost to some health issue. Marriages have taken place. People have remarried. So many things have happened. And to me, those are signs of a community of MH370 families, which has over time found its way to re-engage with its own reality, its own world, wherever they are. If there's anything that comes up as an event or an issue or a decision that we have to deliberate, we have medium like WhatsApp, for example.
Right.
Yeah, we could do collective calls, we could have messaging. So we do that off and on. But we're respectful of the fact that people also want to move on. And moving on is not to say that they have any less concern for finding the plane or finding answers to many questions that are still bothering us,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think the two realities of pushing for answers and forging ahead with one's own life. I think these two realities are what we kind of reconcile with and we engage with from time to time collectively as families.
Hmm. Now, looking back, what was the exact moment you realized that the official narratives were managing a PR crisis rather than prioritizing the truth? And how did that change your strategy as an advocate for MH370?
But it takes me back in time many years ago, to the very early days. And when I think back, I think the dominant feeling that I'm left with, even today, is that the early days was bungled. The early days of communication and the search and rescue, I thought was bungled.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow there was not a very clear articulation of what the steps were, what was on the cards, and how are families to be connected with. For instance, it took me more than a day or two to just draw the attention of the Malaysian government and the Malaysian Airlines, just to say, hey, I'm here. Somebody talk to me,
Wow.
And so it became very apparent, and I think they were getting hammered by the international press for the sloppy way in which they handled the initial few days of both the search and the rescue. Yeah, and the briefings were, not substantive, and so on. So I think they realized that this is not some. As the days progressed, and it was becoming quite clear that nobody had a clue as to where to look and what might have happened. They knew they had to now come up with a very cogent narrative, a way by which to both engage at the same time, not give out too much because there's not much. They had to appear to be in control without really having much to show for it. All right. And so therefore, call it a communications challenge, call it a PR challenge. But I think they were up against the international community, the international media, the press, the families, the airline industry, other governments as well. So there were multiple actors, who were all sort of focused around Malaysia at that time. And so they had to have a coherent way of getting across to these various publics on, where they are, what the next steps are, and so on. And I think that's where PR became very, very, front and center. I think that's where I think the other thing also is, I think, without sufficient information and clarity, it became inescapable to conclude that maybe they know a little more than what they're letting us into. That perhaps, first of all, we were all at that time still reeling with the thought that how can a 777, supposedly the safest plane ever designed, just disappear, right? And 239 families, including cabin crew and cockpit crew, cannot just evaporate. All right. So I think they had to have. So it is generally assumed that something like this was impossible, and so it also led to a view that maybe Malaysia knew more than they were willing to share. That there was either there was a cloak, there was a cover-up that was being attempted, and we were being misdirected into different things. All right, but all of that also required a very strong PR campaign, and I think we got better at it as the days went by. Is the impression I got. But that didn't mean that anything that they tried saying or doing offered any satisfaction. It just left us empty-handed. It just left us as perplexed as we were on the first day. And as time passed, we just got not just anxious, but exasperated.
We had Captain Nick Huslan, who was the friend and colleague of Captain Sahari Ahmad Shah,
yes,
on our show. And he showed his frustration on the interview itself, that the way the media handled the first 2 days has what has made MH370 as the MH370 mystery. Is the way they handled. They knew the plane made a sharp left towards the west, but till that Thursday, they were still searching on the path from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. So, and he was a senior figure at that time, chief pilot at Malaysia Airlines. So he was very vocal. He did not hesitate. And he said he knew that this PR campaign initial 2-3 days was a total and utter disaster. Like, you have all the data and still you're making things up or pointing, as you said, you're not giving families the right direction. So it's great that you brought that up too. Because I wanted to share his perspective as well, being someone in Malaysia Airlines as well. Now, early on, anger, frustration is a primary fuel back in 2014. Over a decade later, almost 12 years later now, has those feelings transformed into a different kind of energy, or is that still your primary force?
I think sometime around 2018 or so,
Yeah.
it became, I, I realized that anger is a fuel to, you know, to nudge, to force, to cajole, to batter at the government of Malaysia and whoever else mattered at that time. Anger as a force, had run its course. It was useful up to a point. It was very valuable as a
Hmm.
as a source of energy and a source and as a rallying point for a number of families. But you know, there was a risk that we might just get burnt in that process. That
Hmm.
our own anger could end up becoming toxic to ourselves. It could the very anger that fueled this whole sense of agitation, the sense of um, having to do things and having to push and to push and to push could well become something that could end up harming us. And I thought it had run its course at that
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
So what I think took its place subsequently, because also by that time it was quite abundantly clear. Everybody understood that we had lost a family member, and that is a story that's not going to be rewritten in any different way, right?
Hmm.
And so what was left was really to find out where the plane is, why did it land up wherever it did, who or what was responsible. And I think there was still a very burning question of uh, what triggered the disappearance and where did accountability lie, right? And and I think there's a calmer engagement with these questions because even the wait for answers had become kind of overlaid on a whole lot of patience. Because what choice was left other than to be patient,
Hmm.
other than be persistent, other than persevering and persisting and being patient? What other choice was left? Because anger wasn't going to be the answer. It wasn't going to take us very far. Because by then the world had moved on. The airline industry didn't particularly bother with business as usual. Internationally, all governments treated it as something that perhaps happened some years ago, and nothing immediately on the dashboard of for today. All right. So the industry, the governments, and the people who were connected with the civil aviation industry, for all of them, it had become business as usual. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in that context, it is important to keep the questions alive, keep the issue of MH370 alive. And I suppose intuitively we came to a point where we said we need to engage rather than just, uh, you know, give ourselves to angry outbursts of any kind. And I think that's what carried us through up to now.
Hmm. Uh, you have also said that closure is a word used more by the media than by the families. If the plane were to be found tomorrow, would that bring closure or would that just start a different kind of pain?
I think I would elaborate a little bit on this because I think
Sure.
personally, if I were to speak for myself, and sometimes it's been a little hard to make the distinction between where I'm speaking for myself and where I might be echoing or mirroring other families' perspectives. Speak for myself. I had come to a point by about 2017 or so, but 5, 6 years after the plane disappeared, that closure is actually a choice. Because the reality screamed at me that, you know, the plane is missing and it may be found, may not be found. But that my wife is not going to come back had become fairly clear.
Mm-hmm.
So emotionally, there was, I think, an acceptance that, we've been through a tragedy. We have lost, we have suffered, we have grieved. And through it, perhaps we have also grown. And
Mm-hmm.
it is just time to ask ourselves in what ways are we better human beings today? In what ways have we grown? And how do we live our lives which are still ahead of us? Yeah, to me, closure meant, therefore, both an emotional acceptance of the reality that the person we lost is irreversibly lost, and also a determination that it is now up to us to take responsibility for our lives for the years that are still left. Right? At that
Mm-hmm.
time, I was in the middle overs. Using a cricket analogy. Now, of course, I'm probably heading towards the slog overs. But the point is this: that closure then became twofold in my understanding at that time. One, that there was the need to accept the reality, but accepting reality without actually taking responsibility for the future was not a complete picture. And so, while the first was easy, taking responsibility and then taking charge of my own destiny from there on was a lot harder. That's my personal journey through this question of closure. But I
Sure.
understand, and for me personally, whether we retrieve the remains wherever they're found is not as significant anymore. All right. If people are lost at sea, and maybe that's where they were meant to be. And so to me, I'm not particularly religious. I don't have any concerns about how my afterlife will get shaped based upon what I do, here. So I'm not so perturbed, and I'm not so caught up with that question. But I know that some cultures and certain families lay great store in retrieving remains and providing a dignified goodbye, a heartfelt, tearful, perhaps dignified goodbye. And I understand that, and I fully respect that. Okay. So, um, so whether we are able to find or not find is not so much a personal preoccupation. I can understand it might be important for others. To me, now where I'm preoccupied with, or where I've continued to from time to time puzzle over, is really where is the plane and what really happened to it. Answers are important, not just for myself, but for people at large.
Yeah. I mean, of course, this all impacts the aviation safety. So once again, it is very important to, at least as you said, where is the plane and what happened? Two things you guys are asking for, and 12 years later, still we're at the same point where you started. So it's once again it's
Yeah.
very disappointing, from the officials' point of view, how they have handled. And once again, we are not judging anyone, but this is just our opinion, you know. And I want to talk about your book, Life After MH370. And for our audience, we have the link for Narain's book. Uh, Please go ahead. You can purchase it on Amazon. The link is in the description below. So, Naren,
Thank you.
in that book, you describe the void not as empty nothingness, but as something crowded with thoughts and memories. Today, after all this time, does your void still feel like a place of transit, or has it become a permanent landscape?
I don't know if I have an easy answer to your question because I think it has layers. And let me try and respond as best as I can at this point in time. I think the question of the void, there are two, three parts to it. I think one is the information void. And that information void has been something that one has experienced probably from within the first 24 hours after the plane disappeared. And we've lived with an information void at different points in time over the 12 years. The most recent, for instance, is Malaysia signing up with Ocean Infinity for the search? When will it sign? What does the deal say? What are the terms of contract? We have the bare bones pieces of it, but there's very little detail, for instance. So that's just as an illustration of what I mean by this void of information. And I think from 2014, across the years, at different points in time in relation to either search or investigation or compensation or ex gratia, whatever issues that have arisen over the years, we have always grappled with an information void. And at different times, it has been inescapable, this feeling that the government knows more than what it is letting us in on, or that the government could do a lot more than they've been willing to do. All right. So that's one part of the whole question of the void, and the other, of course, is a very personal internal reality, an inner world, where I know for months and years, I have simply had to sit quietly for a few moments to know that there is this barren internal reality of something that I can't get to the depths of it. It's like 25 years, close to 25 years of a life with my wife, where she's been a significant anchor of, through these years. And suddenly the ground beneath my feet was just yanked away. And all that was left was just emptiness. And I just kept going down. And I think at different times, one would just kind of go perilously down and further till something, perhaps even a very mundane expectation of some task to be done that's relevant to the house, just pulls me back, because there is responsibility. There is my mother I have to take care of. There is my daughter. There are chores in the house now that I have to look into personally. There are taxes to be paid and so on. So there are realities that, kept me in some ways afloat. But in my own quiet time, in my own private time, in my own solitude, it wasn't peace. It was just simply an utter emptiness. Right? How did one deal with this? I think partly by talking to friends, with colleagues, friends, newfound friends, old friends, estranged friends who became intimate friends, a wide range of people, sharing anecdotes, stories, venting, um, and sometimes simply just sitting silent, because there were times when there were no words to fill the silence, and it wasn't even necessary. So I think that's largely what my experience of this void has been, the void is essentially arising out of a certain absence. Okay. And the absence, is coterminous with, as I was describing earlier, a certain sense of somebody's presence, because memory is a very potent companion. It's a helpful friend sometimes and a bitch sometimes. So what do you do?
Hmm. Uh, I remember growing up, my grandfather always used to say, uh, I was 6 years old and it has never left me. Past is always painful.
Yeah.
Good, painful, bad, painful. And
Yeah.
as I said, 35 years and it has stuck with me and I never forget. So I can totally relate what you're saying. I want to talk about your blog, Lines About Times.
Sure.
To our audience, we have also shared the link of Naren's blog in the description below. I read it and it touched me. And most importantly, it helped me understand your mindset, who you are as a person, because you have a lot of depth when you communicate in the way you write, you know. So I would highly encourage our audience to please go ahead and read it. Link is in the description. Now, you have archived a decade of frustration, traumatic experience in that blog. When you read your post from, say, back then, 2014, 15, do you even recognize the person who wrote them? And how has the voice of your writing evolved over the span of, say, 12 years?
I'll be honest, I don't make the mistake of going over what I've already written. Or at least I do that very occasionally,
Okay.
precisely for the reason that's behind the question that you asked. I do believe that my writing to me has been representative of a state of mind at a given moment. And so that is one part of the whole question of writing. And so the state of being is apparent in what I write at that moment. All right.
Mm-hmm.
I think to start with, if I look back, a lot of the writing initially was a cry, a shout, an
Mm-hmm.
attempt to reach out to people and an invitation to them to understand what is really happening, both to me and to the circumstances around MH370. Right? There are times, some of it is a vent, a rant.
Mm-hmm.
I see all that. And sometimes it has a very bitter tonality. It has it has a very angry expression at times. But I think as the years have gone by, I think it became very apparent that, in some ways, I and all of us are fairly insignificant, in the larger context of institutions and governments. And while one can express one's grief and one's sorrow and one's hopes and expectations, um, one also accepts that there are limits to what one can do. I'm sure there'll be the odd example of, one person who takes on the system and, who kind of changes and transforms and, does something heroic.
Mm-hmm.
But um, I never imagine that I'm going to be heroic in the first place. And I don't think this required heroism. This required perseverance. As a certain constant reminder to the governments that are relevant, that some things are awaiting action, some things are awaiting communication, some things are awaiting investigation, and so on. So I think the content of what I was writing, I think, shifted a bit somewhat, and it became more critique and commentary without the underlying irritation, the underlying anger, the the heartburn. I think that diminished. So that is one part of it. The other part of it is also I recognized after the first couple of years, that one was not only expressing one's own voice, and in fact there was an expectation that I'm not just expressing my reality alone, but also the broader reality of MH370 families. So I imagine that what I tried writing also carried that responsibility to be, in whatever limited ways I could, be a voice of the families as well, and not make it all about myself, but also be the voice of families in whatever way that is possible, besides formal channels of Voice 370 and so on, but at least in whatever I wrote. And I also accepted the responsibility to voice sometimes things that perhaps other families struggle to express.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that as a possibility. I saw that distinctly in some cases where private feedback would come saying, "Thank you for saying what you said. I couldn't have said it differently or better." So that was there too. So, I think the writing, to my mind, was also imbued with a certain quality of responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
and not merely just about catharsis or venting or, just, indulging my own self. I think that's as much as I can say thinking back.
Great. I want to talk about the debris. I mean, we have seen the debris wash up in Africa, yet the wreckage remains missing. How do you personally reconcile the physical evidence we have with the complete lack of final location?
I don't know what there is to reconcile, quite honestly. I'll tell you
Mm-hmm.
what I mean by that. We have ascertained that 3 pieces of debris, are confirmed debris from MH370.
Right.
Okay. There are many others which have been classified as highly probable, and they've created a gradation of, confirmed to low probability when they come across debris. And what's interesting, what both fascinated me and horrified me
Mm-hmm.
and puzzled me is the fact that the debris that have been found have been found in locations almost 4,000 kilometers away from where the plane is believed to have gone down in the southern Indian Ocean. Right? Where is the southern Indian Ocean? And where is Madagascar and Tanzania and Mozambique and South Africa? There's a huge ocean that separates them. Now, the interesting thing is, beyond the ones that are confirmed, there are at least another 50 to 60 pieces that have been identified, located in that broad region. To me, what I find it hard to reconcile is not the fact of where debris was found and where the plane is believed to have gone down, but I'm unable to reconcile the fact that having located debris, the government of Malaysia did little to actually intensify search efforts along the coasts of Africa, East Africa. Oceanography and drift analysis suggested that debris could land in these parts of East Africa. All right. Indeed, there was debris found. And yet, the government did nothing to intensify a search, to create some kind of protocols with local governments, in Africa, to educate coastal communities. It was left to the families, out of sheer desperation and seeing the lack of action from the government, that they undertook a trip to Madagascar. I think Grace talked about it when she spoke to you.
Yes.
And it's very hard for me to reconcile with that kind of stance. I don't know what the thinking was of the government. Was it indifference? Was it neglect? Had they pulled the curtains down already on the search and therefore couldn't be bothered? So I was quite perplexed, and I was hard pressed to understand the thinking behind it. I don't think it was an issue of resources.
Mm-hmm.
I think the world has enough and more dollars for all kinds of wars and killing and maiming and genocides and God knows what. What we're talking about here are small change.
Hmm.
So it can't be money. So I'm not sure what it is that simply didn't interest the governments. Forget Malaysia. What about other countries? They have no stake in knowing what happened. They have no stake in understanding where is the safety threat coming from and how can they avoid it, how can they prevent it in the future. What about the airline industry? I mean, that level of business as usual and complete indifference, is very hard to reconcile with. Those are things that I find hard to reconcile with.
Hmm. Actually, my follow-up to that is I was going to bring it up is why do you think has the international aviation communities been so slow to implement changes to prevent, say, another MH370? And as you mentioned, is it a matter of cost, which you said no, it's not about the money? Or do you think is the industry simply waiting for America?
Now, I said money is not an issue as far as the search is concerned.
Okay.
Yeah. But, if it costs a lot of money to make design changes, to introduce new equipment into the aircraft, to bring in new gauges, new sensors, etc., etc. It costs money first because they have to design, they have to be able to test it, they have to be able to manufacture it, they have to assure quality, and then they have to install. If you go back to the 737 MAX, the accident that happened, for almost 2 years, aircrafts were grounded. The new generation 737-800 MAX, I think it was called, after the Lion Air and Ethiopian Air crashes in the last 5-7 years. All the 737-800s MAX, 737 MAX were grounded. It was the new gen aircraft for 2 years almost. They were grounded. That's a huge cost. They had to get a fix done. And then they had to make sure that every aircraft that was flying had that fix done. So I think the airline industry would be loath to embrace something that involves additional cost because not all costs they can pass on to their customers. So it may make a dent, I think, in their bottom lines. That's one. The second, of course, is that it also means that regulatory authorities across the world have to upgrade themselves. They have to update their protocols. It means work. And if one odd plane drops off the skies or falls into the ocean and we still can't find it, should we really worry too much and treat it just as one of those aberrations, one of those things that are unexplained but not something to lose sleep over? And I have a feeling it's somewhere along these lines that explain why things take time in ushering changes
Mm-hmm.
in the civil aviation sector.
Yeah. Okay. A couple of more questions, Naren,
Sure.
before we wrap this up. As we sit here now in early 2026, Ocean Infinity's Armada vessel 8605 has completed another scanning phase. After so many final searches, how do you emotionally process these updates? Do you still tense up, or have you trained yourself to remain detached and accept MH370 mystery will stay a mystery forever?
I mean, two, three things. One, nobody has a clear fix on where to look for it. The best recommendations are probabilistic at best. Based upon a set of assumptions and computations, they have arrived at a high probability area. So no search area identified have a certainty about finding the plane. It's a given, it's a known. So one's kind of factored this into our own expectations of uh, a search being successful. At least that's how I work with this question. The second thing I think is that even after 2018, when Ocean Infinity came back empty-handed, I kind of told myself that I may not have answers in this lifetime. And I can only hope that there's no new mishap of a similar kind. And that will be my prayer. But I was quite reconciled to not knowing, at least in my lifetime. But I was quite certain that sometime in the future, we will have answers, either because somebody in the know decided to speak, or our technology becomes sophisticated enough to be able to, have a better response to the search and be successful. So I think what troubles me is when something is initiated and then we don't know enough about what's happening. Or we don't know, for example, what search areas has Ocean Infinity agreed to look at? There are 5, 6 recommendations. Broadly in the seventh arc, along the seventh arc in the southern Indian Ocean. But what is their plan? I don't know. Why did they pick some and not others? I don't know. In fact, I don't think anybody knows quite clearly, unless somebody's, got their ear. So, that bothers me. Or, for instance, when a search proposal was on the desks of somebody in the Malaysian government, let's say way back in last year, way back in May or something, until December, we heard nothing about it. And then something is announced. Oh, they're talking about 2024. Yeah, in 2024. And then 25, something is announced. There's a ham-handed start of the search again by Ocean Infinity. And then it discontinues abruptly. And then for a whole year, we don't know nothing. And then again it starts. And now I understand Armada A605, which was in the search area, went back to port and then has set sail to Western Samoa. So what happens to this search? I don't know. So this I don't know bothers me. Not that anybody has all the answers, but for some of these things, I think it's legitimate to expect that there will be accurate, authentic communication and on time. When that doesn't happen, it kind of puts me in a tizzy. Till I'm able to say, okay, we've, 12 years have passed. It's tomorrow will come. And so will the day after. And life will carry on.
Agreed. Final question for you, Naren, is if you could sit down with the people who actually know the truth of what happened, what is the one thing you would ask them that is not, where is the plane?
I mean, I think if the conclusion is that the plane went down, I would like to ask, what do we know about the last minutes of the people and the cockpit crew? What happened? How was it? What was it really? I think that's it. What were the last few minutes like?
even hard to even imagine. I mean, it's really hard to even imagine. 35,000 feet up high in the sky, and wow, this. Uh, do you personally have any theory of what happened? I mean, we had different guests on this show, uh, journalist Jeff Weiss with the data spoofing, Jean-Luc Marchand, control ditching, Blaine Gibson, high speed impact, Captain Nick, who says that it was definitely an impact. He does not like to use the word crash. He said it kind of touched the surface of the earth. That's his words. Personally, where do you align? What do you think actually happened?
I honestly don't know. I'm not a technologist. I'm not an aeronautical engineer. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an oceanographer. And after the first couple of years trying to be a bit of all of these, I gave up because I think it was foolhardy to try and be all of these. And so I have, by and large, been a witness to the various efforts of diverse groups of experts, wannabe experts, oceanographers, charlatans, psychics. Believe me, there are many who's in the last 3 weeks, I've had three mails and a phone call. Three mails about somebody who tells me, where to find the plane. And one psychic who tells me he will help the government locate the plane. So, you know, uh, so there are all kinds of assumptions, there are all kinds of speculations, there are all kinds of theories. Many of them are fairly rigorous efforts. I have no doubt about it. Many of them are fairly rigorous efforts because they start from data, frame their assumptions, frame their method, follow it through, and come up with some suggestion or a recommendation. And I think I believe it is up to the scientific community and the government of Malaysia to dialogue and to either enter into a healthy refutation of the science and the recommendations of one group or the other. All right. Uh, so I, so my concluding one way or another about what may have happened or why something happened or who did it actually doesn't serve any purpose in whatsoever. It neither comforts me nor does it advance the search or the investigation in any which way. So I've simply learned to just be a witness, and I just hope sometimes that these exchanges across different points of view are more respectful, are more dignified, less acrimonious, more data based, and in a spirit of inquiry. But I think it also has a lot of emotional charge, and people have invested a lot of time, effort, and perhaps their own um, fortunes in some case to try and be the one who helped find the plane. I mean, good luck to them, and good luck to us if any of those actually bear fruit. But I am not in the game of leaning one way or another, or any which way, which people propose, because ultimately the person who has to do something about it is the Malaysian government. I'm not going to handle the search.
Hmm.
And if they are not able to prevail upon the government of Malaysia with their arguments, with their arithmetic, with their models, and steer the search in a certain way, I don't know what to do.
Hmm. Back to the void. There it is, as
Yeah,
you said.
absolutely.
Wow. Naren, uh, this was a very in-depth conversation we had. Your work reminds us that while the world looks for a plane, the families are living through a journey of void that does not end. Your ability to take such a singular, agonizing silence and transform it into a shared language of resilience is an incredible gift to all of us. To our audience, If this conversation moved you, please share it. In a world of fleeting digital noise, our collective attention is the only thing that keeps the search for truth alive. By listening, you ensure that this story and the 239 souls it represents is never truly lost to the deep. Naren, thank you so much for your courage and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Sid, once again, for the time you've taken to help me walk through the last 12 years. I just wanted to take a second to remember
Please.
Jacquita Gonzales. Jacquita Gonzales was a very strong, powerful voice on behalf of the families, speaking up and asking the uncomfortable questions without rancor and always with a smile, never giving up. Unfortunately, she lost her battle with her own illnesses. And so we have lost a very strong voice. And I just wanted to say that through this conversation and every time in the last year or two that we have engaged with questions related to MH370, Jacquita is there in spirit with us, and on her face and her voice and her expression is always there in front of my eyes. So thank you
Wow.
very much.
Thank you, Naren. Such a powerful closing statement from your end. Thank you for your time. And once again, we are grateful to have you on our show. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye.